this is about Westcott and Hort. Even Schofield has been influenced by Westcott and Hort. And there's many statements that are made in the King James, in the old Schofield Reference Bible, giving validity. Well, these are not found, these verses, in the oldest and the best manuscripts. And therefore, as though they shouldn't be in the Bible, causes the question of doubt. Well, if that shouldn't be there, well, what else shouldn't be there? And therefore, you need to understand it. But they both believed in evolution, denied biblical inerrancy, promoted racism, and dabbled in, spiritism. Now, do you want them to be in charge of translating the Bible by which we were basing our whole life upon? I don't think so. Now, they do books that they want to put into Hebrew, and this is what Rudolf Kendall did. He firmly devoted to evolution. He was a German rationalistic, higher critic. He rejected biblical inerrancy, but he was translating into the Hebrew. So you have some putting it in Hebrew, and you have others that are translated into the Greek, which is nestled in, I'll give you his name here in a minute. But Rudolf despised the Jews. He denied that salvation is through Jesus Christ. He denied the atonement, rejected the inspiration of Scripture, and then put all these Jews into writings. I've gone on the internet. I went on the web. And you can just put in their name. And you can see all kind of things about what these people did and did not do and believe and so forth. And all about the translations and what they were doing with the goal and purposes of all of it. And they state it and in their own words, in books and so forth. And so it's amazing that people trust them so much that they will rely upon them as a source of authority. Now, the other ones, both were evolutionists, German theological liberals, and they put the New Testament into Greek. So you have these people who have done some of this background work, and they'll come across as they are honorable and they are authoritative, and therefore they must be, right, because look how intelligent they are. And they have done research, and they've got manuscripts, but see, it comes from a corrupt line, and everything from that will be corrupted. Now, this goes all the way back, showing you just a little bit of the trail. And you can see that these, all the way down to the time in which we live. As you see, where the New Testament, Greek, and then the Hebrew Bible. But all these things happen, and there is a line of succession. Even from the majority text, from Christ and, the apostles, and what did they do? And what did they actually quote from? We'll get into that maybe at another time. But here's another person, firmly devoted to evolution. He was twice tried for heresy by his denomination. He taught at the very liberal Union seminary. He was friends with Unitarians and Humanists. And I also read and studied a little bit more, and I found he's a Calvinist. But now, he highly educated. And they write books, and they can translate the Hebrew and the Greek. I think Bob Gilbert ought to translate his own Hebrew and Greek. Wouldn't that be neat? By Bob Gilbert. Chances are he'd be better off than some of these other guys we read about. All modern English translations rely heavily on Hebrew and Greek manuscripts of the Bible, heavily influenced by liberals and nationalists or rationalists and evolutionists. None believed in the verbal inspiration of the Scriptures. So they did not believe in what we call the a verbal equivalence. They wanted to go by a thought. And so they have this thought, the dynamic equivalence of just get the thought out there, just as long as you can think the same way. Well, that's what most of it is done in the Septuagint. And if Jesus quoted from the Septuagint and just the thought was good enough, well, then it's good enough for us. We don't have to know the very words that he said. We can just go by thought equivalent. Just, well, it means the same thing. Well, you're saying the same thing. Have you ever heard a preacher say he preaches one thing and says, in other words, and in other words, and for example, and in other words, wait a minute, just tell me what the first time you said it, just don't tell me 10 times what you mean. Now, once in a while, I may have to say that in other words, but that's what they do. In other words. And it's not those other words that you need to be mimicking. Anyway, the following quotes from the diaries and letters of Westcott and Hort demonstrate their serious departure from orthodox belief. In other words, here is proof from their own writings of where they come from theologically. And so they hated the Textus Receptus. That's the received text. That's the traditional text from the Syrian line, from Antioch. The manuscripts that our church fathers used all the way down, and from the King James. Now, there's many other Bibles and so forth in between there, but we have, I believe, a copy of the Scriptures that we can trust. Now, they do not care for the King James Bible. 1858, September the 29th, Westcott to Hort. I feel most keenly the disgrace of circulating what I feel to be falsified copies of Holy Scripture, and am most anxious to provide something to replace them. The margin will give ample scope for our own ingenuity or principles. My wish would be to leave the popular received text except where it is clearly wrong. And that's in this book, and those are the pages. Hort says, I had no idea till the last few weeks of the importance of text, having read so little Greek Testament, and dragged on with the Valenius Textus Receptus. They didn't care for the other views. They got their corrupt views. Now, as you think of that vile Textus Receptus leaning entirely on late manuscripts, it is a blessing there are such early ones. Because, see, they believe that their manuscripts are older, so they're earlier at the beginning of the church age. And so they think theirs is better. No, they're not better. Those, what they had, are corrupt. And we've gone over where they found their manuscripts, and they have used those and what was found in the Vatican Catholic Church. But anyway, Scott and Hort also embraced some of the Roman Catholic doctrine. And this is another one of their statements. One of the things I think which show the falsity of the evangelical notion of this subject, because see, the evangelicals mainly follow the line of the majority text. But you had the Catholics who followed a different line from the corrupt text. And that they wanted the